Babil Elephant Sanctuary is one of the largest protected areas in Ethiopia, located south of Harar City at almost 7,000 kilometers squared. It is listed as a Category 2 from the IUCN and home to a vast array of biodiversity in plants and animals, such as the black maned lion and the most northeastern population of African elephants. But before it was legally recognized as a protected area, it was one of many controlled hunting areas in the region. As the name would suggest, the landscape allowed provisional hunting with licensing and otherwise evaded mass settlement and development. However, some historical evidence does establish small numbers from the Aroma tribe and Hawaii clan lived and made seasonal movements through the area. Even so, the longest and most permanent residents to date have been the wildlife. This stark contrast in categorization began taking course throughout the 1960s. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, more commonly known as UNESCO, had two missions at the time, which included identifying potential national parks, sanctuaries, and wildlife reserves, as well as establishing an institution to manage identified protected areas. As a result, the Ethiopian Wildlife Conservation Authority was formally acknowledged as an autonomous body in 1965, and followed by the legal recognition of the Babil Elephant Sanctuary in 1970, with support from the emperor of the time, Haile Selassie. In recent years, the Elephant Crisis Fund and the Born Free Foundation have enveloped themselves in BES conservational efforts. BES was a prime protected area candidate for several reasons, but reports of crop raiding and the continuous rise in rampant and illegal hunting, which put multiple species at risk of endangerment, were predominantly at the forefront. The former Harar Wabi Shabelle controlled hunting area was now an officially recognized protected area, with a new name that would represent why it was to be protected, the Babil Elephant Sanctuary. At the time of establishment, and most likely a result of its previous designation as a controlled hunting area, there were no permanent villages inside the sanctuary, and therefore no evictions took place. Of course, residency isn't the only reason one may contest a protected area. Those who hunted legally with licenses before have since been faced with additional obstacles in order to hunt game as they once did. Though this has been nothing compared to the increase in disputes concerning the boundaries and use of resources from the protected area, a subsequent result of increased human population and settlements around and within the park. Which leads us into Part 2, Threats. The Babil Elephant Sanctuary is ripe with direct threats. Based on a 2019 article, reports show the most detrimental threats recorded have been the overgrazing by livestock, deforestation inside and outside of BES, poaching, mainly endangered elephants, in addition to other animals and plants, human settlements, and permanent and subsistence cultivation, both referring to land for agricultural purposes. However, their main difference has to do with time. Permanent reflects long-term and subsistence, long-term use of lands. Subsistence cultivation is also a term used often to describe those who primarily farm for themselves and family rather than for sell or trade. With all this in mind, habitat encroachment is constantly looming and, in many aspects, already taking place. A global issue being faced is the increase of the human population, and one the region surrounding BES is not immune to. That said, the park has also faced internal human population growth, a rare occurrence within a protected area, but an equally, if not more so, threatening event. A 2014 survey saw 90% of the sanctuary had been settled in some way, shape, or form by people. As the population grows, so do the settlements they establish, the lands they cultivate, and the quantity of resources they procure to maintain their livelihoods. Each contributes to unifying a vicious cycle that harms the landscape of BES and puts the wildlife at risk, all the while contradicting the purpose of a protected area. It is nothing new to suggest poverty influences a multitude of threats, especially those BES currently faces. Poverty equates to a lack of education or none at all, and often inability to relocate and desperation. A lack of education has been linked to a negative attitude and general lack remorse for conservation. The inability to relocate leaves populations to grow where they are, even when it's not ideal for multiple parties. And desperation for food and/or money are motivators for many illegal hunters and poachers, and plenty more that puts pressure on the system and in turn BES. Underlying causes for habitat encroachment within BES can be narrowed down into three categories: political, socioeconomic, and ecological. Ethiopia has had internal conflicts, government turnover, and general strife that has warranted several setbacks and unfortunate events, including the inattention, lack of upholding, and overseeing of conservation efforts such as BES. Poverty and a growing population are contributing to the stress of a society with little to no progress on how or what to do about it. And climate change has taken its toll on numerous landscapes. Flooding and droughts are perfect examples of how once vital lands can be destroyed, and humans across the region have contributed to its destruction by stripping the lands of resources like lumber, with small efforts to replenish what's been lost. As established by the underlying threats, Ethiopia's history has undoubtedly influenced BES's own history and the threats it currently faces. Instability is no friend to progress, and seeing as the region has historically faced numerous bouts of civil unrest, which brings about displacement and/or relocation, the area is breeding grounds for a growing, impoverished population in search of places to settle and expand. And since the government is ever changing, involvement has been seemingly inexistent in easing pressures of all sorts, unfortunately forcing BES, with little to no support, to find alternatives which will alleviate said threats. So, what are they doing? The Babio Elephant Sanctuary's most recent management plan outlines an array of current and future plans with conservation in mind. As mentioned in Part 1, outside organizations and funding have contributed immensely to supporting BES initiatives. A priority task has been the proposed capacity building and boundary modification. Conflict over settlers' rights have primarily been in the northeastern sector of the protected area, which has led to management to propose expanding its boundaries to the south. This proposed plan would avoid further inevitable conflict, management constraints, and aggravated land use, while still protecting a nearly equivalent portion of land lush with biodiversity. Some planning tools that deserve honorable mentions include ecotourism development, research and monitoring to be used for continuous evaluation, and the assessment of security and human-wildlife conflict within the park. Nevertheless, the most utilized planning tool within BES has been management zones, breaking the park down into sectors such as the Biodiversity Conservation Zone, Integrated Resource Use Zone, and the Community Use Zone. While some success is evident, it has clearly been subpar to say the least. Most prominently effective, though, would have to be the management zones, given its clear indication of working with settlers without imposing dramatic conflict while also maintaining clear boundaries. And now, key management principles. Changing the nature of values. As settlements have grown and become a more evident issue, rather than simply forcing those settlers out, BES works to expand south where the lands are just as relevant but lack the conflict rights of the Northeast. Shifting baseline syndrome. Surveys and other means of polling have shown that younger generations are more sympathetic to conservation and willing to work to maintain biodiversity within BES. Managing with community in mind. Over the years, BES has become more aware and influenced by working with the community, rather than against, through multiple means such as the Community Use Zone and Southern Expansion. Given the threat is influenced by human population growth into the protected area, each of these play a key role in attempting to remain peaceful with the people while also maintaining the land to remain protected and full of biodiversity.